So I'm really glad we brought up financial crimes again because I forgot to say this before. Mike Jetty's sitting in the back. Mike Jetty used to work at the Arizona Attorney General's office. The reason I bring that up is because the Arizona Attorney General's office has specific jurisdiction over financial crimes and frauds, particularly those committed on the internet. So what I find very interesting is the suggestion that Pima County is just beset by fraud and nothing's being done about it. There are prosecutors within our office who are handling fraud cases today. So I would love to get a chance to pull the numbers on that and come back and tell you how many fraud cases are being handled by how many different prosecutors in our office. But I think it is extremely important that we collaborate. And there was a mention of the word collaboration, and yet there's no justice done to it when we act as though the Attorney General's office doesn't exist. Now look, maybe they leave a case alone that they don't want to follow up on, and we need to take it over. And that's fine, we can do that. Just today, we were having a back and forth over a gang-related case with the Arizona Attorney General's office, figuring out who should prosecute it best. Okay, I can't get into specifics of any case, of course. But the point is, collaboration is critical, and I'm doing it on a daily basis, and the Arizona Attorney General's office does a great job of prosecuting financial crimes.
Thank you.
Okay, are we ready for our next question?
Somebody wrote two wonderful questions, I just can't read them.
Yeah, one little handwriting.
No, it's the handwriting. Do you want to write your question down later and then we'll ask it?
Sure, I didn't know that was the process.
Yeah, I forgot, one thing I forgot were the 4x6 cards. And I left some little pads around, and then we'll read your questions.
Okay, so now, Mark starts with this one. Is victim criminal mediation, I used to be a mediator back in the day, used to resolve nonviolent crimes? If so, why? And if not, why?
I'm not sure I understand the context of the question.
Mediation.
Well,
With mediation where you meet with a mediator and you meet with an attorney and you try to resolve
Right.
arbitration.
So if this was a misdemeanor type of a scenario there, or misdemeanor compromises, where you can kind of work out a non-criminal situation, that's what we call a compromise. It doesn't apply to felony cases. Sorry to sit behind you a bit more, but we don't have mediation arbitration in that regard, like a civil case would, where you're compelled to go to some mediation arbitration prior to getting to the court. We have plea negotiations where I guess it's kind of a process where the defense would present information mitigation to you as a prosecutor. You would then discuss it with the victims. Those two entities don't, the victims and the defense attorneys don't have contact, nor would I think that would be a good idea to have them necessarily in the same room discussing those types of things, especially in violent crime situations. But plea negotiations are a daily process that we go through, and that's between the defense attorney and the prosecutor and other people like victims that are involved in the process. So with regard to that, that happens daily. And many of our cases are pled, to a little bit lesser time or lesser this, depending on the facts, depending on the circumstances. And that's through a guideline process. We go through that process. So I don't know if I answered the question, because the arbitration process is not really part of the criminal side of things. Thanks.
I lost track. Well, I think it's a fascinating question, and it refers to, I think, creativity, and prosecutors have ultimate discretion, and the head of the office will set policy. And that's what I mean about important collaboration. And yes, I referred to the back of the room, but chose not to call him out by name. But collaboration with our partners in federal court and in the Attorney General's office is the key to making sure we know what we're doing, and we're figuring out best practices, and we're growing our training needs every day. creative prosecution is possible. I was a federal employee in federal court from 08 to 16, which I promise is just a coincidence. But it put me right there where I got to watch and study the Obama administration move some criminal justice reform into federal court. And they say federal court's the hardest, federal government's the hardest to move. It moves at glacial pace. But I watched it happen, and I watched the creativity. And then when I built my own small practice 4 years ago, it was incredible creativity. I was a victim advocate, and I would represent families and sit with parents who had lost a child and try to interpret for them what the criminal justice system was and what was happening. And I would work with both prosecutors and victim advocates and defense attorneys in seeking the best outcome for the family. I was hired by large-scale construction and fiber optics companies to help people, to help them hire people coming out of prison and getting them back to work and helping them navigate the probation system. And so the job ultimately of an administrator is to surround yourself by brilliant minds who are ready for meaningful and responsible reform, to hire good, ethical, talented senior leaders who are going to train the next generation of prosecutors, to bring to the table what informs me. My brother, my only sibling, is the sergeant of a highly technical mental health policing unit that's out in the community. And talk about creativity. The first thing he said was, "We're not going to be in uniforms." And the department gasped, "You're not going to be in uniforms." "No, we're not going to be in uniforms. And it's going to de-escalate the situation when we come into people's homes." And they ended up setting the record for not using handcuffs and just talking for hours until people came back into court-ordered treatment. I'm obviously very proud. This is what informs me. This is what teaches me. There are endless possibilities when we're working together and we're ready to embrace change. And that's why I come back to how important a violent crime unit is. You're seeing it on display right here. But how important it is to have a head administrator ready to do the full job of representing the county.
Thank you. The question was about mediation, but I think it does relate to some broader things we're doing. So there was mention of misdemeanor compromise, and that is the way that you'd have mediation in the misdemeanor context. And in the felony context, we don't really have it. Well, we have the means to have it. We have the kernel of it happening right now in the juvenile setting. What do I mean by that? In juvenile, I referred to this before, Barbara has created a program we're really proud of called Community Justice Boards. What are they? It's restorative justice, folks, which is exciting. Restorative justice is a kid gets in trouble, and instead of going through the juvenile justice system, they go to a board of community members who are all trained in restorative justice principles and can tell the kid, hey, we're going to work on accountability. We're also going to work on improving your connection with your family or your school. They might do an art project, and we have listened to these kids come back and say it was the best thing that ever happened to them. Okay, so community justice boards work. It's restorative justice. We have it right now in the juvenile system, and so you want specific ideas of an administrator who is going to be creative. I've been out talking to educators, finding out why we don't have that same program in the schools. Why am I worried about that? Because kids get suspended for bringing dope to school, and I was a bad kid too, okay? And what happens is, you get suspended. These days, it's not like it was in my day, 3 days. It's like 60, 90, 180 days, and you can just see that downward spiral starting. At school, this isn't about the criminal justice system, so what if we take that program we have, that works, and export it? What if we talk to educators and administrators, like I've been doing, and we grow that program and spin it out? We don't even have to have ownership of it. Let's just figure out how to inject it in schools, because currently the alternatives to suspension program may just be taking a kid and putting in a building, giving them access to a computer where they have to study by themselves away from class. Do you think that program is going to encourage that kid who made a bad decision? No. So, but I do want to mention one other thing about restorative justice, because two very special people joined us tonight. Mary and John Siegel. Mary is the sister of Kay Reed. Kay Reed was murdered in 2008, and her body was never found. And I prosecuted her killer. I was asked by Barbara in 2014 to put the case together that had sat uncharged for 6 years, and I put it together. Some prosecutors said it was unwinnable. It was a no-body case. We won and held Kay's killer accountable. But I bring this up, and I know this is real life. This is what I really do. I know it's difficult to talk about, but what Mary and John really wanted, yeah, I mean, a criminal conviction and accountability was good. I hesitate to even use the word closure. There's no closure. They wanted Kay's body found. They wanted to ask questions of Kay's killer. And I pledge to you, if elected, that I will facilitate victims being able to communicate with defendants, if possible, under a new restorative justice program that we can build and apply to felonies using what we've learned from community justice boards. Thank you.
Okay, what are your thoughts and beliefs concerning privately operated jails and prisons? Are they doing a better job at care and rehabilitation of inmates than the public, government, operated facilities have done? What is the cost difference?
When I was a brand new attorney, I was in the Pima County Public Defender's Office, and I remember my first trip to the jail. And not long after that, I remember it was the monsoon season, and when you're inside a jail, you're inside a room, inside a room, inside a room, inside a room, and the jail lost power. And you couldn't even see your hand like here. And I was meeting with one of my very first clients as a brand new 25-year-old attorney. It was a profound part of my career, spending time coming in and out of jails, and it informs who I am and the bulk of vulnerable communities that I've worked with in our county. When I became a Fed in 2008 is when I started spending a ton of time in Florence in private prisons. And I had no idea that our Pima County Jail was like a hotel compared to what it looks like in a private jail where the almighty dollar is all that matters, and where temperatures are kept freezing so that you can offer inmates less hygiene and less showers. Showers are expensive, so just keep it freezing, and then there's no body odor smell. And everything is treated with Tylenol. That's the burst appendix, Tylenol. Take 2 Tylenol. You can tell, I'm not a fan of the private prison industry. And it's going to take legislative action eventually to address that. And so we can't wait for that here. We need to address reform here. We need to decrease the number of people going in. We have a county jail, we have state-run prisons, so the private prison system is separate. But we can do our part here to stop helping them keep their beds filled. And that reminds me that last year we actually had, I think, 12 criminal justice reform bills in the legislature. Even our legislature. We can follow Texas and Oklahoma. We can catch up. We had 12 bills. One made it all the way to the governor's desk, bipartisan, supported by both Republicans and Democrats. And this office, this administration drove to Phoenix, this county attorney's office. They drove to Phoenix and asked the governor to veto it. And he did. I promise you, not under my watch, not under my administration. I am going to be answerable to and supportive of the legislators in both Republican and Democrat side. I'm going to be supporting them on their efforts for reform. It's more responsible to the taxpayer, and it's more humane, and that's a universal platform.
So we're gonna spend money no matter what, right? Lots and lots of money to house people. And if they're gonna be housed for life, you're gonna spend lots and lots of money to spend. That's one of life's facts. So whether it's a private prison or a state prison, it's gonna be paid for by the state, primarily. The county's gonna be paid for the county. Private state prison is gonna come from funds. Okay, it's still gonna come from Arizona. We gotta pay the prisons, if it's a state prison, not the federal prisons, but the state. As a county attorney, I don't think there's a huge difference as a county attorney. They used to say government is wasteful of money, and I agree with that. Many governmental agencies are. And they used to say that a privately run business is more efficient, more effective because it looks at the bottom dollar. I don't know that to be true. And in prisons, when you're dealing with human beings, do you want costs to be cut like that? We all want humane, fair, decent treatment for these people who are incarcerated. Whether the state pays it or pays a private prison is not, I don't think, a responsibility or a particular driving point for the county attorney as to that goes. It's a legislative decision, and I would leave them to make that decision.
Private prisons need to go, period, and that's a position Barbara and Amelia and I have had all together. But I do want to say something because this topic has come up. I'm running for office. I adore Barbara LaWall, and I believe she's been a visionary for her time, but I'm not Barbara LaWall. And I'm going to do some things differently. Forgive me, Barbara. I've gotten in a little, we've had some fun arguments about marijuana, we've had some arguments about death penalty, and I am not going to do the same things legislatively. Now, let's talk about prisons. I think you can tell I'm bold, and I'm not shy. And we are going to fight DOC, okay? That we're gonna put the corrections back in the Department of Corrections. What do I mean by that? Yeah, we agree, get rid of private prisons. But what else? I have spent I don't wanna say I've spent my career fighting violent crime because I had 10 years in private practice as a civil lawyer before I ever became a prosecutor. So of my 25 years, I've spent 15 fighting violent crime. And it has, to my lovely wife Heather, who's here tonight, felt like a lifetime through those trials, those brutal, brutal trials that we've lived through. And let me tell you something, some of those trials have been violence in prison. I find the prison environment totally unacceptable. I find it outrageous that we pay our tax dollars to have a system that's racist and violent. What are we doing? We're sending people to prison and making them worse. And we gotta get real about this, folks, and it's gonna make some people mad that I say this, but I sit in rooms with victims, not Mary and John, bless your hearts, but victims will say, he's gonna get what he deserves in prison. And you know what I say to that? Not on my watch, that's not what I want. When somebody goes to prison, what we're currently hoping for is that we protect society, because sadly we know that they're not gonna get treatment. Above 80% of inmates need treatment, 3% get treatment in prison. That's pathetic. So we need to reform the Department of Corrections. And I'm not gonna stand up here and say, as county attorney, I will reform the Department of Corrections, because I don't have that purview. That is not part of our office, but we do have some pull with legislators and lobbyists and other county attorneys, and we can and should never give up until the prison system works something like the way we would want it to. As you go into prison, you're given more and more rehabilitation opportunities that you can take advantage of. And if you harm and present a threat to other people, then you've got to be routed into a facility that's more secure. But if you do not harm other people, then what we are looking at is one thing, which is your rehabilitation and your reentry. That's what prison should be about. And as somebody that's had to go out to shankings at prison, to the scene of homicides and brutal stompings, and that have left people permanently in a vegetative state, I don't want to see any more of that out of prison. So we do need to reform our prisons, and I think you can tell my heartfelt commitment is there to get that done. Thank you.
what we've been talking about. Is jail the best place for individuals arrested for possessing tiny amounts of drugs? Now, medical marijuana is very big in this, well, not maybe Continental Ranch, but in Sunshine. And, you know, the gummies are the most preferred because then they get the best high. So, and, you know, there are states all around, including Illinois, that just went marijuana being legal. So, this is a question that's probably gonna hopefully be viewed in a couple of years, but.
Thank you. There's a reason why bail reform, as we call it, is so important to me, and I shared that story about the $500 bond, because jail is for two groups of people. And so on day one, my prosecutors will start arguing in court that if someone's been arrested, they should be held there if there is evidence that they are a danger to the community or a flight risk and not likely to return for their next court hearing. That's it. Danger to the community, flight risk. That's the test by which someone should stay in jail. And so someone arrested with a small possession of drugs should not be in jail. They should be in treatment for a third of the cost. We heard earlier, well, what are we gonna do on the fourth time? That is the problem, that is the current problem, is that there is this DTAP program, the Drug Treatment Assistance Program, and there are 60 people a year in it. That's not nearly enough. It's a great idea, and it's not working because of the small amount of numbers going in there. We have to do treatment initially, not on the fourth time. Because if they go in and they're stuck in jail on these $500 bonds, they go in, they get out, they fall off the wagon, they're ill again, there's never been any treatment, they go back in, there's no treatment, they come back out, and then that's how we literally create the burglary rings that are harming us. That's literally how they come together, because they're being trained in our jails. The sick, the poor, and the mentally ill are being trained how to become criminals. That's where we have to intervene right at the start, so that jail, which is a frightening place, as Mr. Mosher was just describing, prison is an unhealthy place, only there for those who are truly at risk for harming our community. And at a fraction of the cost, then we can start going after the kinds of crimes we want to. We can address rampant property crime. We can have the amazing victim services that are available when a homicide occurs, which is luckily rarely, thank goodness. We can take those talented victim services and we can move it into property crime. We can actually assist people in filling out restitution claims. We can provide real victim services where the community really needs them most. This is what will happen, and yes, we will save a fortune when we stop seeking the death penalty. There was a moratorium for many years. I don't know why so many were filed in recent years. One of them was signed by Mr. Mosher in February, and it's the case he continues on right now, seeking the death penalty right now. Again, on day one, we're going to save a fortune when we put an end to that.
So was the question of whether drug users should be in jail, if that's effective? It's been a while since I heard it. Not because of you. So here's the quandary, I guess, is, I go to these initial appearances, where sometimes in the morning, sometimes at night, where the judge sees the person who was just arrested, so the person was just arrested hours earlier for drugs, right? And they go before the judge. And they look like a mess half the time, right? Most of the time, these people are drug users and addicted. And the judge has to make a decision, do I let them out? So there's two parts of the question. One, does that overnight stay in jail benefit that person? I mean, does it clean them up for that period of time? I guess it does, but are they gonna go out and just use again the next day? Well, probably. And the question that bothers me is that a lot of these people are just using drugs. But let's just say there's a percentage of those people who are doing things to get those drugs. And what are they doing to get those drugs? Well, a lot of them are not working. They don't have a job. They're stealing, they're selling drugs, they're panhandling, they're breaking into cars. You know, we don't have that information that they're doing that day. But that's one of the problems of letting them out of jail, is you run that risk of them trying to find drugs. I'm not talking about violent people, I'm talking about drug users who want to get a little bit so they can get high for the day. So do I think they should spend long periods of time in jail? No. You know, what are the cops supposed to do with them when they arrest them in our current situation, our current state? They're gonna arrest them, they're gonna take them to jail, unless something changes. One of the changes is you don't charge them as a misdemeanor with these small amounts. Okay? Don't charge them with a felony, they don't have to go to jail. Thanks.
The question is jail the best place for a person possessing a small amount of drugs? And I want to break that into two parts, because first, there was some mention of marijuana. I just want you to know my views on this. Marijuana should not be illegal. It's hypocrisy that we continue to pretend that there's some principled distinction between alcohol and marijuana. If I invited you down to look through the caseloads I've handled as a prosecutor, you would see the mayhem that alcohol wreaks on our lives. And, you know, I'm sorry, I can't support the further criminalization of marijuana. So nobody is gonna do a minute in jail for marijuana, possession of marijuana. Now, dealing 1,000 pounds, that's a separate question, okay, but that's marijuana. Nobody should be in jail for marijuana, period. And again, forgive me, Barbara, have any of you ever had a boss? Anybody had a boss? How many of you have a boss right now? Can you imagine doing this with your boss right here? Okay, and especially, I mean, you know, we disagree on a couple of things, but I'm lucky to have her endorsement and support, and I've learned a lot from Barbara Lewall, and I treasure what I've learned from her. Okay, now, in terms of small amounts of narcotics, drugs, now let's shift over to what I've learned from Amelia Kramer. It is not evidence-based good practice to send a person with small amount, of dangerous or narcotic drugs to jail for a lengthy period of time. Why? You might think, oh, they're safe there and they're drying out, and then we know they won't use. No, it's not good. They may not be an addict. They may not actually need treatment. If they need treatment, their addiction may come in a variety of levels. They might need outpatient. They might need inpatient treatment. Okay, what jail can do is traumatize folks. And so no, it's the absolutely worst place for a low-level drug offender, and it's not happening on my watch. Now, strangely, we got into the death penalty, so I'm gonna talk about it for a second. Remember how I just said the thing about bosses? So I don't know how to be more clear about this. I am not currently running the office. I work for someone who is. And that person supports the death penalty in certain limited instances, and she's been very judicious about its use. We are at the cutting edge in terms of the large counties in Arizona. But that being said, I don't make the decisions about that. Let me be clear. We will not be seeking the death penalty if I am elected county attorney, period. Write it down. I've put it on my website, mosier2020.com. I'll say it wherever I say it, and then you can tell me later if I'm a liar, because I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a liar. All right? So we're getting rid of the death penalty. It sounds like any of us elected would be getting rid of the death penalty, so I think we can move on from that. It's tremendously wasteful of resources. And I do agree that we can use the resources in a much better way when we save on prosecuting low-level drug offenses. But victim services, I think there are many of us here who know that we do an exemplary job of victim services at our office, and I think that's really a proud point. I'm sorry, did I go over? Sorry.
Okay.
And do you want
Yeah. Obviously, we're gonna not be closing at 7 because we wanna give everybody a chance, including some of the candidates that are here tonight, to have a chance to meet with with all of you and tell you what they're about. We also have the one person who has a presidential office in Tucson. Representative for Elizabeth Warren is here. And she's gonna talk a little bit too. Afterwards, after we have a bathroom break and a water break and candy, but first let's finish, we still got some more to go.
This is very brief because I think that the contrast here is so important. All three of us are talking about criminal justice reform, so I think we need to know as voters where each of us comes from. In the 90s, as a teenager, I joined the Coalition of Arizonans to abolish the death penalty, and I assure you being against the death penalty in Arizona in the 90s was rough. It was a long, long road, and it was beautiful to be able to tell the now so-called named death penalty alternatives for Arizona at their annual meeting 2 weeks ago that I was now being quizzed as a Democratic candidate for Pima County Attorney to make sure I had the credentials to back up that I was indeed anti-death penalty. I say this because as a responsible administrator, I would never write a blank check to my most talented appellate attorney and tell them to litigate and relitigate and relitigate the same case for 25 years. I'm gonna use taxpayer money differently. But I also say it because I became a full-time candidate to run for office, but my opponents remain in the office, and Mr. Mosher set aside all of his homicide cases, but kept his death penalty case going forward. And that spoke to me, and I think the voters need to understand the difference.
Are we at the last question, or you want to do closing?
Closing.
My kids are waiting for me.
Your kid's older than he is. He's got babies. His son is the size of his, and his daughter is gonna be president one day, which is amazing. Does he want to say goodnight for, he said that he's gonna before we even started. All right,
What are the county attorney's responsibilities besides prosecuting criminals? And what are your qualifications to deal with them? So is it Mark's turn? Yeah.
Lots and lots of responsibilities. There's like 50 criminal lawyers, juvenile lawyers, and civil lawyers. Who here cares about ordinances right now? Billboards, ordinances, Joel does. That's one. Another guy in a green shirt. What about too much stuff in the yard, things like that? What you do is you fill those positions with the people who know what they're doing, and that's part of being a leader in that responsible position. My focus is still, when you think of county attorney's office, you think of criminal prosecutions. Right? 9 out of 10 people think that. They don't think about city ordinances or things of that nature. There's a whole civil side, yes. Okay. But I think the focus should be on keeping things safe in Tucson, Marana, and all of Pima County. That's the #1 priority. If we can all feel safe, everyone's lives are going to be better.
So I have a little different take on the importance of our civil law firm that's operating under Barbara's direction. It is the largest civil law firm south of the Gila River. We have about 25 civil lawyers in our office. What kinds of things do they do? They represent the Board of Supervisors, give legal advice to the Board of Supervisors. That's pretty important, right? They also respond to environmental quality concerns. I think some of us might care a great deal about that. They're representing the county in opposition to save the scenic, in opposition to the Santa Rita mine. I almost said save the scenic Santa Ritas. So that's pretty important work. And, you know, there's a lot of other work that goes on in the county legal departments. We're talking about who signed what document in terms of, yes, I am on a case prosecuting a child serial killer. I can't discuss any pending case. I'll be off of it to take my unpaid leave of absence I must do shortly, but that is true. I did not make the decision that that case would be death. However, when we look at what other documents people in our office have signed, right, because there was a reference to signing documents, we have signed documents to obtain funding for Humane Borders to put water in the desert so people don't die. I'm proud of that. I mean, that's really cutting edge stuff that our civil department is doing. So yes, we have 25 lawyers. They're highly regarded. They work in a broad array of, I mean, they advise, I almost left one out that's really important. They provide legal advice to the sheriff. And so therefore you can imagine complex ethical issues arise because we are prosecutors on cases involving sheriff's deputies, or we might even be prosecuting a sheriff's deputy. That's not unheard of, right? And so there's conflict issues as well. And the reason that I want to focus on this is because I am the one candidate who's had almost a decade practice in large law firms. So before I got 1 minute. Okay, I'm gonna focus this time. I don't want to go over time. So my legal career goes like this. I came to the Arizona Supreme Court after graduating from Iowa Law in 1994. I clerked at the Arizona Supreme Court in 1995. I then got distracted by the appeal of working at law firms and did that for almost 10 years, including at a couple of massive law firms in California. And the reason I bring that up is because I agree in a certain respect that the county attorney must be far more than just what I like to say a trial dog. I spent a lot of years being a trial dog. And I think that's important perspective to have for the physician. Prosecuting cases, knowing what makes a good prosecution case, knowing what case should be pled and what should go to trial. But at the same time, Barbara does so many other things and the job involves so many other aspects, including civil division, which should not be discounted, and my experience uniquely qualifies me for that role. Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Moshe that the civil unit is equally, if not more, important, and I don't think it gets the attention that it should. Law and order is almost 2/3 of the entire county budget, so almost 2/3 of every tax dollar goes to law and order. But the civil unit is a part of our lives, the air we breathe, zoning, businesses, turning out reliable research is how we build our local economy and local small businesses. It's incredibly important. So I'll make it simple. My plan is to surround myself, as I have my entire career and my entire life here in Tucson, by those that will create a philosophy for the civil unit and inspire attorneys to stay and make a career there. And that's exactly what I've been working on the last 18 months in federal court, is reaching out to agency partners, being present in the community, making sure I understand what the needs are, and where we can work together for better outcomes. For me, I found one thing to be simple. You know, I did it with the United States Marshal Service, and then I did it with the probation department. You create a project, you meet together, you work on the project together for 6 months, and then you sit back down and you transparently share data and figure out if it's working or not working. And that's exactly how it will go in the civil unit as well. And that's it. I'm gonna cut it short so we can
Alright, we only got
close it.
one more question that you can, if you want, take and you'll have extra. Domestic violence, we haven't discussed domestic violence, and having been a caseworker, I'm unfortunately very familiar with what domestic violence does to a family and to a child's psyche in growing up. So the question is, domestic violence is a clear and present danger in Pima County. Jonathan Moser indicated that it is a prominent source of violent crimes. What is your detailed plan to reduce this crime? I'm going to add one other question to it so we can start to close up. Basically, a couple of people asked the question, what are your qualifications to do this job from your backgrounds and experience? Okay, so it would be, you did, he's ready to leave, but here.
I was looking for some notes.
So those are the last two things. Oh, here.
So we have a domestic violence unit that focuses, and they're all specialized to focus on the dangers of domestic violence. We all know what they are. And they try to follow individuals. We have misdemeanor domestic violence, and then we have felony domestic violence out there. Violence is violence, whether it's against a partner, a family member, or it's against a stranger, I think, has a lot of similarities. People are injured, hurt, and killed from that. My specialization is that I do violent crimes on human beings. That's exclusively what I've been doing for many, many years. Domestic violence is a violent crime against a human being. The connection is that it's someone you may have, you have a relationship or had a relationship or think you love or don't love, and all those factors come into play. When it escalates to a felony, we have a great unit that addresses all those things, and they take a lot of cases to trial. And I think that's the best way for those people to be held accountable, is to take them all the way to trial, short of plea agreements. There are special circumstances when every domestic violence case, I think, has, that a lot of cases don't have. That's why the unit that we have is focused on some of those idiosyncrasies, and they know what to expect, and they can identify people who are in danger. I've been, for the last 18 years or more, I've been there for 23 years, identifying dangerous people to the community. That's what I do. That's what I like to do, and that's what I want to do. It's no different than identifying domestic abusers and domestic violent people. Thanks.
So, and I couldn't tell, are we addressed, where's Ed like that?
You got 3 minutes to answer that, 2 minutes to answer
DV
that.
and our qualifications for the job of county attorney.
Right, and then you'll do your 3-minute closings.
Okay, all right, so first, on domestic violence, I want to talk to you about resources for victims and developing trial expertise. So resources for victims in this area are absolutely critical, and you should be very proud of the fact that in Pima County, we're doing wonderful things in this area. So the Emerge Center Against Domestic Violence, many of you have probably heard of that. We work closely with community partners who provide resources for victims so that we can get them safely out of the home. We can even hopefully house a pet, for example. I don't know if you know this, but in DV relationships, often it's a he, not always. He might threaten the pet as well. If you leave me, I'll kill the dog or whatever. So it's really important that we have those resources for victims, because they'll, otherwise one might stay, right? Because of the care for the dog. See what I'm saying? So we've got to have community resources where we support victims in getting out of a potentially lethal relationship. What other resource are we really proud of here? Amelia was at the forefront of developing what we call the appraise, or the Form 4. It's a lethality assessment that originated right here. It's evidence-based. We passed laws requiring it to be given in every case of domestic violence, and basically it rates how much danger someone is in, lethality risk, in terms of their scores on this instrument, so that we can figure out if we've got to keep somebody in jail. Because folks, some people need to be in jail. Right? So part 2 is domestic violence offenders who pose a serious threat. We're going to take them to trial, and those are difficult trials. Either that, or we'll extract a plea that sufficiently protects the community. But to do that, you've got to have a credible trial threat. That's where somebody like me comes in, quite frankly, because that's the type of work I've been doing for years. So you've got to have experts who testify about why, for example, a victim might recant. Jurors really struggle with the idea that domestic violence victims sometimes come in and say, none of it ever happened. So we work closely with experts in that field and present their testimony in trial, and I'm proud of that. Tracy Miller, our domestic violence supervisor, is an absolutely amazing prosecutor, and we will continue to emphasize our work in that area. Real quick with respect to qualifications, I got 40 seconds, 39 seconds, she says. Okay, on qualifications, I mentioned before the civil and the criminal experience. I've tried about 100 trials. I didn't count them specifically. I think it's about 100 major felonies and a couple dozen homicides. I know trials inside out, including big, complicated cases. But more importantly, I've designed and implemented training programs for prosecutors. I've lectured nationally as well as around the state in terms of methods of presenting cases at trial. I've implemented a visual approach to trial in our office that literally is at the forefront of how we present evidence in trials. And you've got to be able to do that to lead the office. It's not just being an administrator. And the other qualification that I have is some significant management experience. So you've also got to know the players in the office, the different programs, and how to develop them and make them succeed. Thank you.
For 4.5 years ago, when I built my own small practice and my mentor came with me and became of counsel to me, which he calls emeritus, which is wonderful. I was very surprised about what my first case would be coming out of the community, out of private practice. I wasn't expecting it. They were parents and they had lost their adult daughter to very serious addiction and had lost contact with her until they were suddenly called to the hospital where the boyfriend had very seriously injured her and left strangulation, what appeared to be strangulation marks on her neck. And she was very seriously injured. And the realization became that he wasn't her boyfriend, he was keeping her addicted. He was her supplier and had complete control over her in the domestic violence pattern that can develop. What happened then is that working with the parents and hiring a private investigator, we discovered that he had open strangulation cases against 3 different women in Vail, Tucson, and here in Marana. And the 3 departments had not communicated with each other. There were different probation departments, there were different prosecutorial agencies as misdemeanors, as lower court levels, and no one had realized how very seriously severe his behavior had escalated. And so it took the attorney and the family and the investigator to have a high-level meeting with the special victims head of the office and the Pima County Attorney's Office, and then to get the 3 law enforcement agencies to communicate with each other, and then the 3 probation officers to communicate with each other until we could finally find a way to keep the community more safe. That seems to me to be the perfect example. The county attorney is not in court. The county attorney is not prosecuting cases. They're not prosecuting a homicide in front of a jury. The county attorney is connecting the dots for the community, bringing communities together, bringing law enforcement departments together, increasing communication, being present and transparent at meeting after meeting so that we collaborate and increase communication and figure out what makes our community safer. That's what the actual administrator does. And that's why I feel uniquely qualified to have this role.
Wow. What a group, huh?
I thank everybody who came here tonight to be with us, to listen to these marvelous people and their experience and their hopes and their dreams. And it's really hard. It's not easy when you have lousy people. So I would like to now do a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to do 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Closing. And then we'll all applaud at the end. And then, if you don't mind another couple of minutes, there are about 4 people who would like to talk briefly about who they are, candidates, and who some of them who they represent. And then there's water, there's cookies, there's restroom back here, and then I need help cleaning up. So since we started with Laura, we finished. You go first.
The role of county attorney and why you should put me in that office. I want you to envision one thing that Barbara does of immense importance to this community. She presides over something we call the homicide panel. This is not just being an administrator. This is not like human resources here. This is deciding what homicide cases in this county get charged, get presented to a grand jury for charging, what homicide cases get pled and for what, and which ones go to trial. And that's Barbara's job. And she can't assign that to someone else, nor does she, to her great credit. She does not assign that to another person, because that's not why you vote for her. She is not an administrator, and I bet she's shifting in her chair wishing she could jump up and say, hey, I'm not an administrator, I'm the county attorney. I run an office full of prosecutors, and I make decisions about what homicide cases get pled and which ones go to trial. So let me give you an example of one, because it's the one I mentioned before. Marcus Dixon. Marcus Dixon, 6'5", 300 pounds, driving a Charger, upset on a hot June afternoon because Martin Padilla, in his family minivan, his son Hamza was driving. He was teaching him to drive. And on a hot June afternoon, right over here by Arizona Pavilions, son Hamza was driving too slowly, stop and start. So Marcus Dixon started laying on the horn, and they ended up both getting out of the cars. And Martin Padilla, the father, did not back down and took Marcus Dixon to the ground. Now, he didn't beat his head against the ground. He didn't even give him a black eye. He was just on top of him, holding down, trying to get him to settle down. And Marcus Dixon took out a gun and shot Martin Padilla twice and killed him. And a portion of this was captured on video. And I'm telling you, my immediate boss, the person who had my job at the time, chief criminal deputy, this gives you an idea of that the chief criminal deputy does not make all the decisions in the office. My immediate boss didn't want it charged. She's a judge now. She didn't think we could prove the case at trial. And to her immense credit, Barbara, presiding at the homicide panel, decided no. That case was good to charge, and we did end up taking it to trial and convicted Marcus Dixon. Now here's something else I'm proud about that case. Lest you think that the job is all about just hammering a defendant if we convict them at trial. My sentencing discussion was a little surprising because the family, I worked with the victim's family. Mary and John will know what that looks like, but a lot of you won't. But I worked with them closely and developed trust and rapport. And the victim family wanted the maximum. But I had told them what I would have to do at the sentencing, and here's what I did at the sentencing. I stood up and informed the judge that we were dealing with a man who was not only employed, a taxpayer, not a drug user, stable, a father of two with a third on the way. This is the defendant, not the victim. And I was proud to bring that up in court because it's appropriate mitigation, it's fair. It's what you do when you're a prosecutor. Because the reason we bristle at the word administrator is because we love this job. We love protecting this community and making those tough decisions about what we do with your resources. And that's what I would be proud to continue to do. That's what I want to do as county attorney. Thank you.
Thanks. So, my wife's here. Hi, Melinda. So come on in. Say hi to everyone. She doesn't want to get. She won't be embarrassed. So, I mean, this is. How do I say this in nice way? This is your choice, right? This is your choice. Us three, right? No Republicans that we know of. Joel's not running. Just us. So, you got to judge motive. I can't speak for them, but you can evaluate people's motive. I'll tell you mine. My wife got me a shirt. It says, it's a family shirt. And it says, husband, father, protector, hero to the kids. Kind of nice, right? And I think I am a hero to my kids sometimes. I want to do it for them. I want to do it for my family, and I want to do it for your family. That's why I want the job. I want to continue with what I've been doing, and that's fighting violent crime for all these years. I grew up and was raised in Tucson. I've been a lifelong Democrat. I didn't switch over. I have the most experience of anyone in Arizona as a trial prosecutor in violent crimes. No one else can say that. And that's why I want the job as county attorney. Thank you.
right, Mark's right, the choice is right here. It's likely to be resolved who our next county attorney will be when these ballots come to your home in July. This is a sprint, it's coming up quickly. And I never intended to be a candidate, but I'm so invested in this community that when it suddenly came open for the first time after a 40-year partnership, when it came open, I knew I should give it the best I could give it. My husband and I have a 6-year-old boy, and we tend to stay here, and I hope he builds a lifetime here as well. And we're that invested in this community that it was in fact my husband who first thought, maybe you should run, Laura, maybe you should do this. And then there was a lot of laughter for several days from me. But then I couldn't get the question out of my head about whether we could bring in an attorney from the outside, whether we were ready now to bring an attorney from outside the agency to breathe fresh life into this office, to recruit, to hire, to train attorneys to stay and really challenge the retention problem we're having there, get them to stay and build a career for a lifetime and inspire them to do that. When we shift and reframe our priorities away from low-level nonviolent drug offenders, and we actually start going after those who are really harming our community, we're gonna have inspired young prosecutors ready to keep this community safe and sound for the next 20 years. I want to ask you and invite you to share in this image for our community and share in this image of reform and a healthier county where we live. So I want to remember to ask you to check out lauraconover.com. It has more information. If you're on social media, and I wasn't after a 16-year criminal justice career, I was definitely not on any social media. My team, my large, beautiful team is forcing me to embrace it now. So it's Conover for County Attorney is the Facebook page. I invite you to join us. We have a broad base of support from the community all across the Democratic Party and beyond. And I want you to join and inform me and educate me as we make our way to the July primary. Thank you so much for having us.
Much better than watching TV, huh? You got the real thing here. Thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure. I want a picture of the four of us. Close. All right, take a 2-second break, and then we'll hear from Linda Edison, and we'll hear from Ryan, and we'll hear from Sonia.